Hi everyone, and welcome to the third and final instalment of Scottish Ballet's Safe to Be Me Festival 2021 Inspirational Talks. My name is Ailbhe. I use the pronouns she and her, so I would love if you could use those words if you refer to me. I am a white Irish female. I have purple hair and I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I am here in the studio at Scottish Ballet, so I have a white background behind me with a ballet bar. Today, I am delighted to introduce Catherine King. Catherine is our British Sign Language English interpreter. She has curly hair. She uses the pronouns she and her. She's wearing a blue t-shirt and has a plain background. And I'm really excited and delighted to be joined today by Marc Brew. Marc is an acclaimed international choreographer and trained professional dancer. He has his own company, Marc Brew Company, and also had an incredibly successful 20-year career working with many companies across the UK and globally. Hi, Marc. It's lovely to have you with us today.
Hello everybody.
So Marc uses the pronouns he and his, and I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself to Marc this morning. So thank you for joining us.
A pleasure. This is Marc speaking. Yes, I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a white Australian, 6'2", slim build. I am a wheelchair user. I'm wearing a black cap and a black jumper or sweater with some white writing on the side. And I'm in a white room, which is my office. And behind me is some posters from previous shows of mine, as well as a spare wheelchair, manual wheelchair of mine. And I have two pots of flowers behind me and a white cupboard. And it's an honor to be here. I'm calling in today from out of Glasgow, south of Glasgow, in my new home.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marc. So we're here today to hear all about your journey through dance, your incredibly successful career, and to have a look at what that journey has been, what it's taken to get you where you are and where you are now. So could you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yes, definitely. This is Marc speaking. Where does one begin? I will begin in a small rural town called Turley, which is in New South Wales in Australia. So I grew up as the only boy in the village who danced. And of course, I was teased a lot. I gave up dancing many times, but I did have some good friends, and my dance teacher encouraged me to continue. So I did, and I never looked back. And from there, some dance teachers and my gymnastics instructor recognized talent, and they decided that I should audition for an arts college or arts high school. And I did. I auditioned for one in Melbourne and also in Sydney. And when I grew up, I used to watch Fame, and I thought, wow, yes, I'm finally going to go to a Fame school. And I did. I auditioned and I got in. So I went to the Victorian College of the Arts secondary school in Melbourne. And that very much began my formal training as a dancer, where I learned a variety of dance styles, as well as doing academic studies. And I was aged 11 when I moved away from home. I moved away from my mother. I grew up with just a single parent. So it was just my mother and I. And yeah, it was hard. But it was also what I wanted to do. I wanted to follow my passion for dance. And once I got there, I felt like I finally fitted in. I wasn't the one who stood out and wasn't alone anymore. I was with other dancers who wanted to dance. And at the school, I very much grew up there and made lifelong friends when I was there. And I also got my high school education. And from there, I then auditioned for the Australian Ballet School, which is in Melbourne. And I decided to pursue classical ballet because I found it challenging, and I loved a good challenge. But also I was told, because I originally wanted to be a commercial dancer and do musical theatre, but I was told being a classical ballet dancer would give me more security when I grew up, because I could be in a company full time. So for some reason that stuck with me, and I thought I'm going to go down the ballet route and really pursue that, and then I can move into more contemporary or musical theatre later. So I was very fortunate to be accepted into the Australian Ballet School, and I did my 3 years training there. And while I was there, I also danced with the Australian Ballet Company. And from there, before I graduated, I was hired to dance with Pact Ballet in South Africa. And I always wanted to travel. My dream was to travel the world dancing and choreographing, because I always choreographed, even from what being back in Jerilderie. I remember as a kid, I would get all the girls, because it was the girls who I was always dancing with, and I'd get them over to my house and stand at the front of the lawn and use the mirrors, the glass from our windows as sort of a mirror, and I'd teach them all these routines. So that choreographic spirit and creativity and dance, obviously, was in me from a young age. And as I went through my training, I was encouraged to continue choreographing through my training, through high school, and then through the Australian Ballet School, and then also joining companies as well. And when I joined Pact Ballet, I was there for a year. And one Saturday afternoon, a friend of mine and I and two other friends decided to jump in a car and drive to a game reserve to go bushwalking, as you do in Africa. And unfortunately, on this day, a drunk driver had driven down the wrong way of the freeway or the motorway and hit our car head on. And unfortunately, my three friends were killed, and I suffered massive internal injuries and a spinal cord injury, which left me paralyzed, originally from the neck down at C6, C7. And the drunk driver survived. And this moment in my career, my life, was obviously unexpected. I was 20 years old. I thought I was invincible. I thought being in a car was safe, but you never know what's going around the corner, and you never know what other choices that other people make. And on that day, the drunk driver decided to get in his car and cause this accident that changed my life and the life of my three friends forever. And as you can imagine, being a dancer, my whole life is about my body and movement and expressing myself through movement. So to wake up in hospital, it was almost like watching a movie, but it was my own life. And I remember the doctor coming in about 2 weeks after the initial accident and said to me, "Marc Brew, you're never going to walk again." And I just went, "What? This can't be happening to me. I'm Marc Brew. I'm a dancer. I'm a choreographer. Get me back to Australia. I'll be fine." And as a dancer, we're often used to being injured and having injuries through our career. So I wasn't afraid of hard work. I was just like, get me back to Australia, into rehabilitation. I'll go to the gym. I'll do my exercises and I'll walk again. And I really did think that I would walk again. Unfortunately, when you get a spinal cord injury, the damage is done to your spinal cord, and there isn't a cure for a spinal cord injury. And so once the spinal cord has been pinched or severed, the paralysis is there. And then it takes they give you a 2-year window for healing and any sort of movement to come back. And thankfully, I did get back my hand function and my arm function, because in the beginning, I had no movement from the neck down. And then gradually I could move my arms, and I managed to get some dexterity in my fingers. But I remember I had to try to touch my thumb to my fingers, and it was so hard. And I had to work every day to try to get this action of touching my thumb to each finger. And now I can do that. But that was really hard. I remember how frustrating and hard that was. But I was determined. I've always been determined to do the best I can and to follow, my pursuit of what I'm wanting and to where I'm wanting to go. So I wanted to be the best I could and recover the most that I could. And after going through 4 months of rehabilitation, I did build up a strength again. And I then started to having to use a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair, and then explored how I could also move on the floor and also swimming and learning how to swim again and being in the swimming pool was wonderful and a brilliant sense of freedom for me. But I wasn't going to walk again. So I really had to change my own perception around what is dance, who is a dancer, and what can dance look like for me moving forward. I knew that I still wanted to dance. That passion was still there. I couldn't switch it off. And many people said to me, "Oh, you need to go back to, university and study something else and retrain." And I just remember thinking, no, I'm a dancer and a choreographer, and I'm going to continue that. I don't know how, but I am. So that led me to firstly getting with a group of dancers I knew and just exploring being back in the studio, how I would move in my wheelchair, how I'd move on the floor, how I would partner with other people, and also look at how I could translate, existing techniques such as ballet and contemporary to my upper body. And it made me realize that dance for me wasn't about having, beautiful turnout, gorgeous feet, high extensions, flexibility. I mean, those things are wonderful and they offer, they give you a facility to improve your art, but it isn't everything. And for me, dance was about expressing myself through movement. And I could still do that. And I still had a body, and my body was beautiful and is beautiful. It just moved differently to what it was before. So I really used also as a choreographer how restriction through my physicality can be a really wonderful creative tool. So I really use my physicality and the way it moves now as a starting point to creating new movement and generating work. And nobody moves like me now. In a way, I'm unique and we're all unique. And I very much love to draw that out in other people as well and really use that uniqueness as strength and bring it all together to create work. So once I found a way forward and dancing as a disabled dancer, as a dancer who used a wheelchair, there wasn't a lot of opportunities in Australia. I was the only one that I knew as a disabled dancer in Australia. So I knew that I needed to go traveling again. I needed to find other people. Where were my role models? Who are the people that I could look to or ask questions? This was all very new to me. And I found that there were dance companies that worked with disabled and non-disabled dancers. I heard about Canduco Dance Company in London. I heard about Axis Dance Company in the Bay Area in Oakland, California. I heard about Infinity Dance Theatre in New York. And it just so happened that two of my friends were in New York and they did a ballet class at American Ballet Theatre. And in wheeled this woman using a wheelchair and did the whole ballet class using her chair. My friends, of course, pretty much jumped on this woman and said, "Hey, our friend Marc has had an accident. He's now a wheelchair user. He's a dancer. He needs to know about you. You need to meet each other." And that led to this person whose name was Kitty Lunn and has a dance company called Infinity Dance Theatre. Reached out to me and we got in contact, And that's when my world pretty much, exploded in regards to, other opportunities. And she invited me to come to New York and retrain as a disabled dancer using a wheelchair, looking at how we translate, existing techniques to using a wheelchair and our own physicality, and how we transpose to the upper body as well. So within 2 years after my accident, I was back in New York City. I was at Steps on Broadway doing class every day. Along with Kitty Lunn, I was the only wheelchair user in that class. And I'm not going to say it was easy, because it wasn't. I had to face a lot of my own personal demons in a way, around my own training of what I was told a dancer needed to be and what a dancer looked like. And I didn't fit that mold anymore. So I had to deal a lot with sort of breaking away from that traditional perception of what a dancer should be. And one way I did that was actually by not looking in the mirror, by stopping looking at the mirror, that I needed to feel it. And I knew what it meant to feel dance and to move. So I just had to rely on that, and also the teachers who were teaching me to give me corrections. So I would transpose or translate, a plie to my upper body. And I would also do a port de bras along with that plie, and then I'd use my arm to do port de bras, or then I'd use my arm to do a tendu, or a développé. And I remember thinking, wow, I've got the highest développé ever. It's right up by my ear, because I'm using my arm to extend up. And that really led me on that journey of, how to translate dance to my body, existing techniques to my body. And then as a choreographer and a dancer, how I built strength, through my own physicality to explore. And then from New York, I was in contact with Access Dance Company and also Canduco Dance Company. And I did a summer intensive with Canduco Dance Company. And I really loved the company. They were a full-time company. They had amazing dancers. And I fell in love with the company. And I was offered a position to dance with Canduco Dance Company. So in 2000, when was it? Oh gosh. Can't remember the date right now, but it'll come to me. I joined Canduco Dance Company. So I danced with the company. It was 2003 till 2008. And that was a wonderful experience. I moved to London. I got to work with some amazing choreographers, amazing company. The company was led by artistic director Celeste Dandeker, Dandeker. And that was also another opportunity that I had to be led, to have a role model from an artistic director who was disabled and had a wheelchair, was a wheelchair user, and also a dancer. So that was a great turning point for me, and building confidence, and developing my artistry as a dancer and a teacher. And in 2008, when I left the company, I left because I wanted to develop my own work as a choreographer, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity within the company for me to create on the company. So I began my own company, as you mentioned, Ailbhe, called Marc Brew Company. And this was the vehicle for creativity and developing my own work, working with people that I wanted to work with, to make work. So I've been making work with Marc Brew Company from then. I've done lots of shows, toured around the UK, Scotland, and I've worked with some other great companies around the world. And in 2017, I was offered the position of artistic director of Access Dance Company, which is based in Oakland, as I mentioned earlier. So in 2017, I took up the position and moved to Oakland as artistic director of the company, where I've been since. and I'm now in my 5th year of working with the company as artistic director and choreographer, and it's been a wonderful experience. I've learned a lot, you know, relocating to another country, learning about the different funding systems, working with some amazing collaborators, and obviously the dancers I get to work with. And yeah, it's been a real joy. I made a work in my 1st year with the company, and also I'm making a work right now. But I never imagined I'd be making this work virtually. So it's been interesting. But I'd say, my journey is still continuing. Um, I'm always looking for the next adventure. And as I mentioned, I love a challenge, and life has presented me with many challenges. But I think determination and following one's passion to continue, if you want to dance, you dance, and no one else is going to make that happen. So you need to sort of put in the work and follow your ambition, and get out there and be creative and explore all those possibilities. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a ride.
I mean, an incredible journey, to say the least.
Mm.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. There's a few things in that I find really interesting. You talked a lot about yourself and who you are, and what's important to you, and different moments in your life, I guess, growing up with your mom, and then you talked about getting your friends over, and seeing yourself as a dancer, and then obviously having your accident, pivotal moments in your life that kind of fed into becoming who you are today. So I wanted to ask you about that sense of identity. I heard so much about the different strands of your identity, coming out through your different experiences, and I'd love to know how that filters into your kind of creative practice. So my question is, what is identity to you, and how is it that you express that?
Great question. And yeah, actually, I've actually used that idea for a piece. My first piece I made with Access Dance Company as artistic director was looking at identity. And the reason why I was interested in identity was because my identity had shifted and changed. And I think identity is very important. It's who you are. It's how you identify in the world, and no one should take that away from you. And for me, as I mentioned, I grew up in Australia, so I definitely identify, as Australia is my home, as being Australian. But I am a traveler, and I can never settle in one place. So I'm also an explorer. When I grew up, as I mentioned, I was the only boy in the village, so for me, coming out as being gay was extremely hard. And it wasn't until I left Jerilderie and actually started working professionally that I could start to explore my own identity in sexuality, and how I identified, my gender, and that's something that grows and shifts, and for me, it was when I was confident enough to then come out and share that with people, and that's been important to me. That's been a sense of freedom, acceptance, and joy. And for me, when I had my accident, I remember specifically not wanting to be identified as disabled, because there was this, there's been this horrible stigma that disability is less of being human. But I'm human. We're all human. We all have different conditions. We all look different shapes and sizes. So we've got to stop putting people into this stereotype of what someone should look like or act like or be like, but actually be proud of our uniqueness and our differences. And for me, it took time, but originally after my accident, I was like, no, I'm not disabled. I'm Marc Brew. I'm Mark. This is who I am. And that is true. But now, as things have shifted, and then once again, I've grown more confident. And also I've built community now in the disability community, because before my accident, I was never exposed to anybody with a disability in my family, or through ballet school or ballet training or ballet companies. So this was a new journey, a new discovery of finding and making community with other disabled people, and from that, I learned a lot, and then I got to have that confidence and build that identity that, yes, I am disabled, and that is a part of my identity, and that's not a negative, that's a positive, and as I mentioned before, in difference there is beauty, and I very much am out and proud to be a disabled gay man, and that is really a part of who I am. And it has been interesting, as a professional, when I use that and when I don't. Because in the beginning, as I mentioned, I wasn't really identifying by those things. I just focused on my name and who I was. But now I really specifically even put in my bio, about those identities, because I want to be a role model for others. I never had that role model, initially when I acquired my disability. So as a disabled person, someone who identifies as being queer, I really want to, yeah, be able to support and be a role model and be an ally with these communities, and be that support. So I think, that has fed into me as a person, and also, as I mentioned, into my own work, because I was interested in identity and how my dancers identify, and how that has shifted and changed through our lifetimes, because it doesn't always stay the same. We evolve, we're humans, we grow, we learn, and I think that's very natural. So yeah, I think there's a lot of empowerment to identity and how you identify.
And I think that voice speaks so strongly throughout your work in what I've learned about the kind of pieces that you create. And so I'd love to go with you a little bit. We haven't got loads of time left, but to explore a little bit that how you physicalize this kind of idea of identity and creativity and expression. There was a quote that you've used to describe your own work that I would love to read out, if that's okay, which is drawing on the unique physicality of each performer. The work with disabled and non-disabled artists is honest, unsentimental, and recognizably human. I think that is beautiful. And I'd really love to hear about what that means to you, and how that filters into, how you dance and how you create dance.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As I mentioned, through difference there is beauty, and we're all unique. And one thing I learned was, for so long in my, traditional training, I was made to try to fit into this mold, and then I didn't fit into that mold anymore. And for me, realizing that and then using the strengths of not fitting into that mold to create my own pathway, my own journey, really empowered me and created a lot more possibilities. So when I'm working with dancers, artists, collaborators, I'm not wanting everyone to be the same. We are unique. Everyone moves differently. So I'm really looking at how I can draw that out. And that's not to say that I don't use choreographic tools like unison of everyone dancing at the same time, in the same pathways. And also, I now generate material and give material to dancers. But even when I'm giving a task of, I may teach an arm phrase, whatever it may be, say it's that, I would teach that to them, and then I'd ask them to make it their own. So what can you do with this? I've given you the outline, the stencil, and now I want you to shade it in with all your rainbow colors, whatever colors that work for you. And it's amazing that people then take that challenge and that task and create this beautiful collage of textures, dynamics, light and shade, and with that, I then use that to then bring together, to create and mold the work that I was envisaging being put together. But I love what people bring. I love giving people the opportunity to explore in their own bodies, their own physicalities, and then it's a conversation. It's how we work together to build. And a lot of people ask me, "Oh, do you work differently when you're working with, say, a ballet company, or if you're working with a contemporary company, or you're working with a integrated company of disabled and non-disabled dancers?" And I don't. I mean, I come in with the same panache, energy, um, personality, and I begin it up. I begin with always meeting the dancers, getting to know the dancers, which can be unfamiliar to some people. I remember actually when I first worked with Scottish Ballet, and every day we circle up and I check in and I ask a question every day and everyone talks. And that was really hard. They're like, oh, we're not used to talking. This is way back when. But that happens a lot. But for me, it's really important to build, once again, that sense of community with the people that I'm working with. I want to get to know you. I want to get to know your choices and your personality. I want it to come through your work. And then if they have that ownership over that, then that comes across in the work that we create together. So I'm really trying to draw out people's uniqueness and identity and their personality and be a part of the creative collaboration together.
I think panache is exactly the right word to use there, Mark. It's been so wonderful to hear you speak today. I've been incredibly inspired. I think I've had goosebumps several times throughout the last half an hour, so I can't begin to thank you enough. It's been so incredible to hear about your journey, and I think it will be very inspiring for a lot of young people to see that pathway. So thank you so much, Mark. That was wonderful. And I'd like to also say thank you to Catherine for being with us today. So thank you again, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely afternoon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Ailbhe.
Thank you.
Thank you.